Now we're going to be editing single leaf plants. In other words, plants that are created entirely just by one leaf. So I'm just going to load in a plant. We're actually going to select the fern and click OK. And we're just going to be using textures directly from the leaves collection without any modifications at all. But they were created the same way we pretty much made our leaves in the last chapter. And what we're going to be using is just a simple weed and turning this fern into a small weed. So first we want to edit our actual leaf texture, and I'm just going to edit the function. Pull up our function editor. And now what we can do is just replace our color and our transparency, and then we're also going to be adding our other maps to it as well. So I'm just going to load in what I already have here, the set of weeds, which is included in the content folder of the tutorial. And I'm just going to load in our color first. I also want to make sure that we rotate around our leaves, because when we're working with view, our leaves are actually all upside down. So anytime we're working with a single leaf, we want to make sure that we rotate that 180 degrees. And now we're going to select our clip map. And in this case, our clip map needs to be inverted. So we can just hit this little button up on the top right of our image and invert that. And we can already sort of see our material starting to take shape in our plant. And I'm just going to go ahead and close this out right away. And we're going to come back and make those additional changes. But first we're going to take a look at the actual plant in our editor. We want to make sure that we drag our starting point just above the bottom of this leaf, because all of our weeds, we want to make sure that all of our stems are connecting in the bottom. And what I also want to do is reduce our length all the way down, and that way we just have all of our leaves combining in the center. What I'm also going to do is increase our curl, and that way our leaves are a little bit flatter. And we can also adjust our width so that it matches up more to our texture and not to the fern that we had before. As far as the stem on this material, we don't need to make any changes to that at all, because we've just gotten rid of it completely. So we don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now we can see we've already created a very simple weed, although it does need a little bit of editing in the material editor. I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick render of this so we can see what it looks like as we move through the different steps. We can see we have some really dark areas in here, and a lot of this is depending on the position of our sun. But keep in mind too, we do want to add a little bit of luminosity to these leaves, just as we did before. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm also going to go up to our atmosphere editor, and I want to change the pitch of our sun so that's just a little bit brighter of a scene, and we can see that plant a little bit better. And I'm just going to render that too. And we can see by fixing the light, we've already improved our material. But of course, we still have these really dark areas, and we want an overall good plant, and we don't want to just work in certain lighting situations. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out, and we're going to open up our material for this fern leaf. We're going to edit our function. And now we're just going to be applying the maps just as we did before. And I'm going to add our bump map. So select our bump, add a texture, and then I'll just load in the bump map that we have. We also want to make sure that we rotate that 180 degrees so that it's upside down. And since we don't have any branches, we don't have to worry about creating highlight. So we can just leave that where it's at, but we still need that luminosity. And whether or not we decide to use a map for that is really a personal preference, because we might not necessarily need it. I can increase our ambience and our luminance just a little tiny bit, and we can see that overall effect in our plant. but sometimes we might want to have the stems where it's not so bright and where the lights wouldn't really be shining through all the way. So we could also do a modifier for that as well. So if we want, we can add the function for luminous. And I'm going to delete our constant number and add in a texture map. I want to make sure we set that to flat vertical. And we're going to load in this case, we could either use our diffusion map or we could use our bump map. Our diffusion map is going to give us a lot more variation in lightness and darkness in the overall material, but a lot of that is related to the actual color. So we're going to go over to our bump map, which is a mostly smooth out solid color, but we still have the dark spots and the stems where we need them, and down through the veins of the leaf. I'm going to click OK. Make sure we rotate that around. And we also want to add our filter to that so that we can adjust how bright this is going to be. I'm going to pull it down about halfway, and we're going to take a look at our preview render and see how bright that is. And pull it down a little bit further, and we can just take a look at the progress between each different level to figure out what looks best. We'll click OK. OK again. And that looks pretty good, so we can go ahead and render that and see how it looks. And if we take a look at our leaves, we can see that our bump map might be a little bit too high. So what we want to do is just reduce that value. So we can just double click. And we're going to go to bump, and we can see we have the depth set to 1, which is actually quite high for a leaf. And considering that we're using image maps as bump maps as well, that can be a rather large value. So we're going to go down to 0.25 and click OK. And we'll re-render that, and we should see some large improvements. So we can see just by manipulating that bump that we still have a little bit of noise in there, but overall it looks really good, and it actually looks like a realistic looking weed. Our color might be a little too green, so in that case what we can actually do is just double click in our plant editor, and we can see our overall color is a very light color right now. So we want to change that to more of a green. I'm going to make it a darker green. And now if we take a look, that might wash it out a little bit too much. We can see our texture pretty much turned black, so that might be a little bit too dark. I want to increase that. And we just want to get that back up to where it was. And we might have to use another method to get the correct green color in there. And click OK. We can see it's very, very bright. So what we can do is actually use a diffusion map if we wanted. So I can double click on our material, and under effects we have diffuse, and I'm just going to click this drive with function. I'm just going to pull up our function editor, and then I'm going to delete our constant number, select our diffuse, and we can add another texture map node. Make sure we set that to flat vertical, and we're going to load in our diffusion map and click OK. We also want to make sure we rotate that again. And now let's take a look at our preview. We can see that darkened up our plant quite a bit, except where our stem is at, where it's a lot brighter. And that's because of the coloration in our leaf, in our diffusion map. What I could also do is invert that, and we get an opposite effect where we can brighten up the overall leaf. And then if we wanted to, we could also use a filter to make minor adjustments and fine-tune that. So we'll edit our filter, and we can pull that down a little bit. And now we have a sort of flat surface and overall color. It looks pretty good though. We could reduce that more if we wanted, a little bit darker, and click OK. Let's just render that out. And that looks really good. It's definitely a usable plant. We might need to adjust the color and maybe tweak a few things here and there, but overall we have a good solid growth weed. So we can double click in our plant editor, and if we wanted to, we could save out their new species, of plant, and what we could also do is select new plant and cycle through the different variations that we can get with these new leaves, and also the different color variations as well. So now we just made another one. We can go ahead and render that. And that's pretty neat looking, a little bit different than our other one. Of course, keep in mind we also still have this dark area underneath, so we might need to adjust our luminosity and things like that to compensate for that, or also even the lighting in your scene, because a lot of that also has to do with it. And if we're using global illumination, radiosity, it'll brighten up some of those under areas. And what we could also do is just increase our overall ambience of our scene and our artificial ambience, sky dome gain, in case we wanted to adjust that. But basically what we're looking for is creating a plant that's going to be very versatile in every sort of scene we create. And we want to make sure that it's not depending on our lighting settings, and it looks good in just about any lighting setting, so it looks realistic. So in that case, I'm actually just using our default settings for all of this in the default sky, so that we just have that basic overall color value, and then we can make adjustments if needed. What we could also do, something a little more interesting, is using a different type of plant with these leaves. And in this case, I'm actually going to use a palm tree or a coconut tree. We'll just load that in. I'm going to move that off to the side, reposition our camera so that we can see the tree. And I'm going to select our fern again, go to our plant layer, and we want to make sure we copy that. And then I'm going to go to our coconut tree, and we want to select our leaves. And we can see there's two different types of leaves. We have our the brown leaves that are along the bottom in sort of the dead areas, and then we have our green leaves. Well, I'm going to paste it onto our main leaves. And I also want to make sure that I go into our leaf editor, but it doesn't look like we can for this plant. But if we take a look, we can see, anyway, we can still see our material, so we don't have to worry about that. And it looks like it's all going to be coming from the center no matter what, so we really don't have to worry about adjusting that starting point. And we still have our diffusion on here, so this might create a little bit too dark of leaves on this specific tree. But we could, of course, edit that to fit in. And we also want to edit our leaves to fit in as well. So we could adjust our length and our width. And we just get a very interesting looking tree that way. So you can play around with it as much as you want. We could also apply this to another type of plant. We could try it on trees. We could try it on these smaller plants and get an entirely different type of plant overall. We're going to try this one. Click OK. And we'll see what comes out of it. So we want to go to our leaf layer, and we should still have that saved, so we can paste our material. And I'm going to go into our plant editor, and now we can get kind of a good look of how this plant is. And we want to adjust where our starting point is, and this actually looks like it's already in a good spot. And then we can adjust our length and our width. And we get kind of an interesting looking plant. And we could do this with any leaves. It doesn't have to be anything specific. I could also adjust our length, fall off, how gnarled this plant is, its diameter of the stem. And we end up with a very interesting looking plant. Whether or not it exists, I don't know, but it does look pretty neat. We can use that for certain renders and in our scenes. So we could also save this out if we wanted, or we could just save out this material of our leaves so that we could load it onto anything, which is my preferred method. And one other thing we could do is also go back into Photoshop and create groups of these different plants. So that in this case, since we're using a single leaf plant where it's just controlled by one leaf, we could actually create a small cluster of several leaves. If you take the fern, for instance, maybe there's not enough leaves on it to make a realistic looking weed. So what we can do is just double up these different leaves within Photoshop and create a cluster that's still pretty much the same basic setup. And we have all of our stems connecting at the same point, but we could disperse them a little bit more, and that way we could get more leaves onto a plant that really isn't designed to have more than one leaf. So we can put multiples on there, and there's just a lot we can do with it. And we can use any of these base materials, any of these base plants to modify them, and we get lots of different results depending on exactly what it is we're working with. We can use all different types of species. If we want to use individual plants, we could also use clusters on these smaller plants and trees. So really the best thing to do is just make up a bunch of stuff and play around with it, try to apply it to different types of materials, see what kind of plants you get out of it, what kind of trees, and just pretty much go from there.